I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. Our guest today is Congressman Derrick Van Orden, and look, he has lived a few very different American lives. He grew up in rural poverty. He was raised by a single mom who told him to work hard, speak plainly, and never back down from a just fight. He joined the Navy at 18, he earned his trident, and spent 26 years as a Navy SEAL, deploying to some of the hardest places on earth, from Bosnia to Iraq, Afghanistan. And later he wrote the book of Man, a Navy SEAL's guide to the lost art of manhood, about responsibility, courage, and character, all the topics that we talk about on this podcast. After he hung up the uniform, he and his wife ran a small cafe in a tiny Wisconsin town before he was elected to represent Wisconsin's 3rd District in Congress, where he now fights for farmers, veterans, working families, and small businesses. But the story that brings him here today is what happened this summer on an Iowa highway. And it was on the anniversary of his own daughter's death, when the congressman came upon a horrific crash, a minivan, a semi, an 11-year-old boy critically wounded, bleeding out on the side of the road. Now, drawing on decades of training, he grabbed sots from his suitcase, a knife, a seatbelt, improvised tourniquets to save that boy's life. So today I want to talk to him about that moment, about why some people run towards danger when everyone else is stepping back, and about many of the deeper stories that underline that and that the congressman himself has talked about many, many times as well. So, thanks for joining us, and Congressman, it's a great pleasure to have you today.
Well, you are welcome, sir. It's nice to be here.
Well, I suppose it can maybe start on that day itself back in Iowa.
Sure.
Tell me exactly what happened those first few seconds after the crash, when you realized if I don't act now, this boy could die.
Well, we have to back up 2 years from there, because that's when our dear daughter, Sydney, died of cancer. And she converted to Eastern Orthodoxy prior to her death. And our youngest son, Daniel Robert, is also an Orthodox. He's also a Christian Orthodox. And so we were driving from our house directly to our son's Orthodox church for the memorial service commemorating the 2nd year of our daughter's death. And that put us exactly at that time in that place to help a young man named Sawyer. And they actually had to move the memorial service to the end of the service. It's a very special Orthodox thing, because I was washing blood off my hands at a gas station and couldn't make it for the original time.
Do you put a connection between the two?
You know what? You cannot deny that. We left our driveway of our home driving directly to a church to memorialize our daughter's death. And if that had not happened, that young man would be dead, period.
Wow. And so perhaps daughter's passing, you've saved another life. You've saved a life when you're commemorating the loss of your daughter.
Right. It was literally 1 year and 364 days after her death. Yeah. So we were driving, and we were on a highway, and I saw a semi-truck parked on the other side. It's actually a divided highway. And there was a semi-truck, and I didn't think anything of it, on the other side of the road, the northbound lanes, and we were driving south. And then I heard a huge explosion, and I looked in my rearview mirror. I've got a Ford F-150, because I'm an American. And so it's got those big mirrors, and I see this minivan disintegrating in real time, and then drifting into the middle of the road. So it wasn't actually on the side of the road. It was in between the north and southbound lanes. And my wife said, "What was that?" And because I'm watching this happen, I said, "Someone just died." It was that violent. And, I have multiple combat tours, and I've seen a lot of things blown up and shot to pieces. And I'm like, there's no way anybody lived through that, because they're going about 70 miles an hour, and that the semi-truck was on the side of the road, and they hit it. So I just turned around. I drove up the middle of the road, in the grass or the median, and I stopped about 15 meters or so away from the vehicle, because I didn't know if it was going to blow up or not, and my wife is in the truck. And I got out and I ran over there. I looked, the driver was alert and oriented, but the passenger side of the car is what took the brunt. That's what hit this stationary semi. So I ran around, the hood is gone. I saw the battery also. I did not smell gas, and I saw the battery had been blown out of here, so the chance of it exploding are very low. And this is all taking place within the second and a half or so. And then there's this young man, he's 11 years old, but he's 6 feet tall. He's a big dude. And he had a fracture, an open fracture on his right arm with an arterial bleed in his wrist. And then essentially all the flesh was gone from below his knee to his ankle on the outside of his leg. And, I'm a trained combat medic, SEAL for a long time, as you had mentioned. And I've, seen multiple wounds. And on a scale of good to bad, this falls dramatically on the bad side. So I ran back to the truck. And here's another thing that's interesting. Because we're going down to Sydney's memorial, and we're going to stay a couple of days, I had a suitcase with me. And I did not have a medical kit, which is, not awesome. But I had socks. So I grabbed 2 pairs of socks and a t-shirt and ran back. And I didn't have a windlass, so I put constricting bands above both of the injuries, and it slowed the bleeding down, but it didn't stop the arterial bleed. And by then, more people showed up. And it's a story that encapsulates the American spirit, because random people just stopped. And so I said, does anybody have a knife? And a dude was there. He pulled out a carpet cutting knife, He handed it to me, and I cut the seatbelts out. And then I said, I need something like a stick or something. And there's this farmer there. It's probably 65. He's literally holding the top of the car up because it kept poking my head. It was shredded metal, and I had all these little holes in my head from that. But he's holding it up with his left hand. He reaches to the front of the minivan. This is one of the most incredible feats of strength I've ever seen in my life. He grabbed the windshield wiper and just ripped it off. That dude is farm strong, right? He handed that to me. I made a windlass for his arm because that's where the arterial bleed was. And then someone else handed me the little thing that you use for a jack, that little, it's a small piece of metal. And I bent that in half and then made a tourniquet for his leg. But then by then more people showed up. It was interesting. I'm tying this stuff down, and I hear behind me, I'm on my knees, working this problem set. And I hear, we need to start directing traffic. And I turn around. It was not a police officer. It was just some random Iowan, everybody. It was just glorious, man.
Yeah.
And so I talked to a trooper because it turned out the driver was impaired. That was his mother. And she was charged for it. And she just drifted off and hit the minivan, But so the trooper called me a couple days after that, the following day, to get my information and all that, in case I had to be a witness at a trial. And I was like, well, how is this guy? And he goes, he's doing okay. And so we had to drive back the same way to go back home. And so my wife and I went to the hospital. I called Zach Nunn. He's a friend of mine. He's a member of Congress, and he represents that district. This is just south of Osceola, Iowa. And so Zach and I met at the hospital with my wife. And this was remarkable. So let me tell you about this kid named Sawyer. Witt is his name. And that's public, so I'm not releasing Myers information. Well, he sat there like, he's 11 years old. And he sat there like a man. It was unbelievable. Remember, his leg is shredded and his arm is, it's huge wounds. And he said, am I going to live? And I was like, look, sir, because I always find out there. I said, look, sir, you are. My name's Derrick Van Orden. And as a matter of fact, I was a Navy SEAL combat medic. And I've seen stuff like this before, and you're going to be okay. And then he said, well, you don't want someone to yell at you when you're injured, right? Mm-hmm. You want a calm, steady voice. And he said, when's this pain going to go away? And I said, Sawyer, the ambulance is going to be here shortly, and they're going to take care of that for you. And you know what he said? Okay.
Yeah.
And getting tourniquets on and stuff, that is not comfortable. He didn't wince or moan or whine or, I've seen, I hope no other Navy SEALs are listening to this, but I've seen Navy SEALs injured before that did not handle that like that 11-year-old boy did. I was so proud.
It's so interesting because not everyone has that ability. Where does that strength come from? Just as you've said, some Navy SEALs didn't handle it in the same way. Where does that resilience come from, do you think? Are you born with that? Does it come from your upbringing? Does it come from the people around you? How are some people able to do that and others aren't?
There's two theories about making Navy SEALs. One is our training makes the SEAL. I do not subscribe to that. I think our training identifies SEALs that are already there. It just weans out the people that aren't. That's how I view that. And so the ability for an 11-year-old, this innate ability to take immense pain and shock and all these things and just take it, that's inside that boy from birth.
I would agree with you.
When we walked into the hospital, this is what's remarkable. He immediately recognized me. After all, I was like, it was amazing. And he's sitting there in his bed and his dad is on the other side. And he said, I want to thank you so much for saving my life. And I said, you're welcome. And now you owe me. And this is what you owe me. You will grow up to be a fine man. And then his dad was there. And I said, Mr. Witt, you don't know this about us, but our daughter died 2 years ago. And I'm so thankful you will not be sharing that experience. Mm-hmm. It was a profound moment.
You're listening to Searching for Heroes. We'll be right back after this. It is, I see it sometimes. I wrote a book after I was injured in which I when I wrote it, I said, I think that resilience is in everyone. Everyone has it, and it's about the community around you. But I've got 4 kids, and I watch them from birth. And since then, I've just realized that each one is different from the day they're born. Some have qualities, some have one quality, others have different qualities. And I believe, just as you said, that I think that some people are just born with that.
So are you saying that the premise of is incorrect? That's what I heard.
Well, yeah. I mean, I analyzed both options. And at that point I went with the resiliences in everyone. And I was going to ask you about SEAL training and whether or not that's what gives people strength. And you've answered that perfectly. The other question is about community. And, you said that what happened on that day was about it's the best American scene. It's everyone coming together, taking part, no questions asked. That's communities coming together. But, I also, and you've spoken about it as well, there's this sense that the country is also more divided. Your book itself, focused on the lost art of manhood, that maybe we are losing that. In some communities it happens, but in other places, kids are losing it. They're just on their phones. They're not partaking in community. Do you think that the country is in the place where it is being split?
Here's what I believe. We're very close to an inflection point again, where this country is going to be divided again, as it was in the 1860s. And it doesn't have to be that way, and it's tragic. So we have people with nefarious intent, external operators, and we have people with nefarious intent as internal operators, and they're working together to destroy this country. We also have people that the title that Vladimir Lenin came up with, useful idiot, is true. So we have some people who appear to be exercising altruistic tendencies, but they're not. They're being used by people external to them, and they've been influenced through what can only be described as an extended period of propaganda starting back in the 1960s. And that's a fact.
So what do we do to push back against that? How do you stop, this happening? How do you stop the useful idiot?
I do this podcast. I just did Vicki McKenna. She's a local radio host in my district. That's the reason that I do media, is to, one, talk about what we're doing here legislatively, which I think is very important. And the other thing is to push back on these ideas and to promote the United States of America and let people understand who have not traveled that this is the greatest country in the history of the world.
Amen. Absolutely.
And we've done so much more good than we have done bad.
Where did it start? I mean, is it primarily the role of parents? Is that where it begins? And putting aside who's born or not born, so like, is that if family, strong family, parents give it, you can't, because the school system, for example, I mean, so many problems there. You know, the curriculum in many places is going in the wrong direction, but does it have to come back home? Is that where we really start to build it? Yeah.
Listen, you know, I could never figure this out. So my dad abandoned us when I was an infant, and my brother was 1.5 or whatever it was, you know, and my mother worked very, very hard. She was one of 10 Irish Catholics. And so, you know, from her, I saw this work ethic. And then I also realized, I saw the rest of my cousins, and none of them were divorced, and they had kids. And, you know, we had, I don't know how many cousins I had. They're just falling out of the cabinets.
I'm a Catholic too. I've got shame.
Right. Yeah, right. It's everywhere. And it's wonderful. So what I did as a child is I said, look, okay, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get divorced, and I want to do that. I want to have kids. So that's what I did. You know what I mean? And again, to me, it was intuitive. I don't like this, meaning not having a dad around. I do like that, seeing my cousins' families and then, you know, prospering and, you know, just having pandemonium. That's what I wanted. So I decided as a very young man to do that.
It's giving people something to work. Is that giving, so when it comes to kids, is that just giving them things to aim for? Is that saying, look, if you work, you can reach, this is what you could achieve, this is what you could have, or is it more sort of basic?
It goes to everybody. Listen, you are the change. You know what I mean? You need to be the person that you want to be. It sounds really, you know, kind of trite, but it's not. Like, I mean, obviously, you know, I'm not growing my hair back anytime soon. So not everything can happen. If I jumped out of my window here, you know, I'm going to die because I'm on the 5th floor, right? So people are like, you can do anything you want. I'm like, no, you can't. Okay, you simply can't. There's never going to be a 4'9" tall star NBA player. It just ain't going to happen. You know what I mean? But there are many things that are achievable, and living a happy life is one of them. You know, choosing what you want to do and how you want to shape your life, and not accepting excuses and not blaming other people for your own either laziness or failures. Just don't do it. And I've failed a lot of stuff, and I've been lazy lots of times, you know?
Well, I mean, everyone would say if you don't fail, you don't appreciate, you know, the success either. I think people...
That's called pushing the envelope, sir. And as a SEAL, the reason... This is kind of an interesting thing. The attrition rate goes back and forth, but for a long period of time, they had this attrition rate spiked. And it's because they went through this screening process where you'd have 10 people and they'd pick the best one of that 10. And then they'd put them with 10 other people and they'd pick the best one, right? So you'd have these people go to SEAL training who had essentially never failed. You know, incredibly gifted athletes and really smart guys and all that stuff, and they would quit. And this is why. If you're in SEAL training for 5 minutes, you've already failed 4 times. And some people can't take that. That speaks to your resilience. So like, there is no way I would have been accepted to SEAL training today if I was the same person I was back then. I mean, I literally flicked out my last cigarette when I walked into the compound to start SEAL training. I had no idea what I was doing at all.
What were you looking for in general when you signed up?
To join the Navy? Out drinking beer with my buddy named Kurt, who I love. I have all the same friends that I have since I was like 14. You know what I mean? I've matured in ways and I've learned more things, but if you're my friend, period. Right? That's the way that works. And so we're out, you know, getting liquored up and they're like, hey, let's join the Marine Corps. We're like, yeah, let's join the Marine Corps. And they're like, we're the best Marines for 4 hours. And then I woke up in the morning and I'm like, I called him. I go, Kurt, I do not want to join the Marine Corps. And he's like, I don't either. I'm like, okay, let's join the Navy. He said, okay. I drove over and picked him up and we joined the Navy. That's exactly as much thought went into it right there. Boom. And then when I was in the Navy, so I would say the word miscreant would not be too far off for when I was growing up, you know. So I dropped out of high school when I was 16 years old and then worked in restaurants and farted around, you know. I was in Oregon. I was very open about this with the Navy, you know, smoking marijuana and playing volleyball in Oregon in the 80s is what you did, right? Then I told the Navy about this. I wrote about it in my book. I talk about it on TV. I don't care. That was me growing up, you know. And so because I didn't have a high school diploma or a GED and I smoked weed, I didn't have a lot of options when I joined the Navy. They said I could be a seaman apprentice, a fireman apprentice, or an airman apprentice. All of these just translate to menial labor, and because they wanted to keep an eye on me. I don't blame them, right? So I chose to be a seaman apprentice, and I worked on a tugboat. Here's the funny thing about how the military works. So they don't trust me, rightfully so. And they gave me 6 months to get a GED or they'd throw me out. So they assigned me to a tugboat moving ammunition. And I'm like, okay, if I didn't trust somebody,
That's role you'd give him.
maybe giving him an office job or something. But yeah, so then I had a friend who his name was Pat, still a good friend of mine. He was a corpsman, which is a medic, and he worked at the clinic. And he was always clean and happy. And I had, primer 150, which is a Marine primer. And this is before people wore gloves and stuff, so I was just filthy all the time and I couldn't get the paint off my hands. And I was just, it's just a really tough job. And I look at Pat and he's like always happy. And I'm like, I want to go do that. So I went to work at the clinic. It turns out I'm smarter than I thought I was. And so I earned a spot to go to Corps School. And I went there, and that's where I met these guys who joined the Navy to be SEALs. And I'm like, what is that? And they're like, oh, you get guns and boats and planes and you blow stuff up. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go do that. And they're like, well, you can't just say, I'm going to go do that. I go, of course I can. I'm going to go do that. So I decided to be a SEAL. The problem was I didn't know how to do, let me back this up for a sec. So on that tugboat, there was a defining moment in my life where I was the smart aleck all the time. Still am. I was on the fantail. That's the back of a boat, for those of you who don't know. And I was looking out into Sassoon Bay. This is about 30 some miles inland from San Francisco. Naval Weapons Station Concord. It's not there anymore. And I had been, being a wiseacre, and I get hit in the back of the head with a 1/4-inch shackle. That's a Marine fastening device. And I turned around and no one was there. And I was like, okay, if I don't get myself squared away here, these people are going to kill me. And so then I decided to stop being such a slipknot at that point. And I don't encourage, that type of behavior modification patterns by essentially threatening someone's life. But it worked for me. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Look, you've done incredible things. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for saving that boy. Thank you for talking about your daughter. Thank you so much for joining me today as well.
You're welcome. Hey, God bless you and your family. Have a very Merry Christmas.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining me again today. And I don't know if you got some of the same ideas from that as I did. First of all, I'm going to say that the Congressman is just the kind of person that we want on this podcast, kind of person who has all the qualities that we talk about on this podcast, someone who stands up when something is wrong, who stands up and comes together with others to protect his community, who isn't afraid of hard work, who holds his country first and foremost, and also someone who has gone through difficulty, losing his daughter, but finding ways to get through that. So honestly, I feel the Congressman is someone who is, well, what a great representative of this country. It was really interesting to hear him also talk about resilience and where it comes from. And this is something we talk about on the podcast quite often, and which I've talked about and have written about. And as we said, are people born with resilience? Or can you become resilient through your community, your family, and your upbringing, etc., and your experiences? And the Congressman is one of the people who says that you are born with it. And this is a discussion that I have often at home. And as I said today, people are born with different characters. They are born with different qualities. And, can you become resilient, or must you be born with it? So it's a fascinating topic of conversation, and one in which I go back and forth on where I stand. Also interesting to hear him talk about the car crash that we began talking about, and what was the reason that we reached out to the Congressman, because again, I just think that shows all the positives of this country. People coming together, no questions asked, to do what was required. But then that leads on to the other issue, which is that happening across the country? Are there parts of the country which are divided and don't come together? And then what can we do to stop that, to prevent that? And as the Congressman said, just reach out to people. We're entering the holiday season when some people may not be doing so well or may be feeling lonely. And this is one of those moments where I think all of us, and I hope all of you guys, can reach out to people, come together and show that that's what really matters in our world and in our community. So Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me and for listening to the podcast today. And you know what? Reach out to me. I want to hear what you think about resilience. Are you born with it, or can you grow it? Can you be trained to be resilient? Or is it something you have or you don't have? And also reach out to people. Reach out to someone you think might be having a difficult time. Stand up and tell someone when they're not doing something right. So stand up for what is good. Try and put down those things which are bad. Be there for one another. And I think those are podcasts, the themes on this podcast that we go over time and time again. So do your best to go and live them today. Anyway, have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining me, and we'll speak to you next week. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. And Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.